expired. Senator Paterson.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. Can I begin my contribution tonight by wishing Senator Pratt's father a very speedy recovery and a safe return home from hospital. I have to say, though, that I found Senator Pratt's newfound concern for older Australians a little bit surprising, given that Senator Pratt is a member of a political party, the Labor Party, which only a few weeks ago unveiled a new policy to smash the household budgets of many older Australians, of many self-funded retirees and indeed of many pensioners, until they were forced into an embarrassing backflip a few weeks later, announcing that their changes to dividend imputations would in fact exempt pensioners rather than their original plan, which was to smash the household budgets of pensioners by preventing them from receiving the dividend imputation credits that they'd been expecting to in their retirement. It's particularly galling for older Australians to hear this newfound concern for their welfare from the Labor Party, when they were prepared to push through a change that would have decimated their household budgets and given them no way to respond. Older Australians, people who have retired, are not like the rest of us. They don't have as much time on their side, and if they've been out of the workforce for a long time, they don't have many options to restructure their financial affairs to respond to changing government policy. So if someone is in their 70s or in their 80s or in their 90s and they planned for their retirement under the policy settings that were in place at the time that they retired, for example, knowing that they would be able to receive a credit in exchange for the tax that was prepaid on shares that they own by Australian companies, and then someone comes and pulls the rug out from underneath them, as the Labor Party proposes to do, there's very little a 70-year-old or an 80-year-old or a 90-year-old can do about that. They're not going to find it very easy to go back to work to earn replacement income for that income that they've lost. They're not going to be able to do anything all that creative with their finances, which they're reliant on for their income. They're just going to have to cop, as we've heard, some very horrific stories, reductions in their income of much as 20 or 30% of their household income. Senator Pratt was talking about a possible $14 a week reduction in income for some pensioners. Well, people affected by Labor's dividend policy will be affected by losses far, far greater than that. The truth is that this budget, like all budgets delivered by coalition governments, is extremely generous to older Australians. It's extremely mindful of the contribution that they've made to their nation over their lifetimes, and extremely mindful of the fact that, as older Australians, they are less able to respond to changing policy settings that could affect them. That's why one of the features in this budget that I think is really worthy of support, and I hope will receive support from this chamber, is the changes that allow pensioners to earn an extra $1,300 a year in private income before it affects their ability to receive a pension or a part pension. That's a really good change, because a lot of older Australians might have quite good health but don't necessarily want to work full-time, but of course wouldn't want to jeopardise the pension that they've plan to rely on for their retirement, and might like to do a little bit of part-time work here and there in their local community. They might like to do a part-time job to keep them engaged in the community as much as anything, as well as providing themselves with a bit of extra income. Well, thanks to changes in this budget, they're now able to do so for more hours if they wish. It's a choice that we're giving them. Of course, another change in this budget, which is going to make it easier for pensioners to live a more secure, a financially secure retirement, is the pension loan scheme changes, which will allow pensioners, if they choose, to borrow against the value of their home and enjoy the proceeds of living against the value of their home, living from an income from the value of their home, again without affecting their eligibility for the pension. That would allow them, in many cases, to significantly enhance their retirement income and their retirement standard of living just by being able to access the value of the equity in their home. So that's another change which we've made to help older Australians better plan for their retirement and better structure their financial affairs in retirement. Senator Pratt mentioned the aged care system. Well, as it happens, my wife, as some senators know, is a co-founder of and director of a business in the aged care industry that helps people who need places in aged care, residential aged care homes, find places in residential aged care homes. So it's something that I hear about often over the dinner table at home most nights. And I'm acutely aware of the particularly strong demand there is in the community for home care because, like many Australians, older Australians become very attached to their home, to the community in which they live. They've chosen to live there often because it's in close proximity to their family, to their children, to their grandchildren, to their friends, to their neighbours that they've grown to become very fond of. And for many older Australians, they would like to remain in their home for as long as possible. They'd prefer not to go into a residential aged care facility if possible. And there's great demand for the government's services, home care services, and that's why in this budget they're being significantly expanded to cater for that unmet demand in the community. So for Senator Pratt or the Labor Party to characterise this budget as anything other than a very favourable budget for older Australians is, I think, very unfair and not consistent with the facts of the budget. I'm very proud to be part of a government that's handing down a budget like this, and I want to talk tonight about some of the really key features of this budget that I think are worthy of support. In particular, I want to talk about two, and depending on how much time I have, I may get to some others. The two that I want to focus on tonight is the tax relief for working Australians, which is provided for in this budget, and the way in which the government has managed to get our finances better under control and live within our means by returning the budget to surplus earlier and delivering a larger surplus within the forward estimates. I'll begin on tax relief because there's a very important principle at stake here. Every single dollar that the government raises, every single dollar that the government spends, has first been earned by someone else. It has been earned by someone because of their hard work, their entrepreneurship, their ingenuity, their effort. And government should only take as many dollars as it needs from the Australian people who have earned it in the first place, as it absolutely requires to run the services that only governments can run and provide the services that no other organisation in society can. We should, as a principle, allow people to keep as much of the money as they earn for themselves because it's right that they keep what they earn, the fruits of their own labour, and because, frankly, they know how to spend it better than any politician or bureaucrat, however well motivated, could ever plan to spend someone else's money on their behalf. And so, in the first stage of the tax relief plan that the Turnbull government has revealed in the budget this week, over 7 years, we'll focus particularly on lower and middle income earners. One of the key features of this package is a new non-refundable low and middle income tax offset, and this will provide up to $530 a year to low and middle income earners every single year, starting in 2018-19. This reform will assist 10 million Australians, with around 4.4 million Australians receiving the full $530 benefit as soon as the 2018-19 financial year. The second phase of the budget is to raise the threshold for the 32.5% tax bracket from $87,000 to $90,000 from the 1st of July 2018. This will deliver a tax cut of $135 a year to around 3 million Australians. Really importantly, what it will do is it will prevent more middle-income earners from being pushed from the 32.5% tax bracket into the second highest bracket of 37%, really countering the potential disincentives that they might face to earn higher incomes by jumping into a higher tax bracket, and of course countering the dreaded effects of bracket creep. In 22-23, the government will increase the top threshold of the 19% tax bracket from $37,000 to $41,000, and it will increase the low-income tax offset that I mentioned earlier from $445 to $645. From the 1st of July 2022, tax relief of up to $1,350 per year will be provided by further increasing the top threshold of the 32.5% bracket that I mentioned earlier from $90,000 to $120,000. This is the bracket that was increased in the last budget from $80,000 to $87,000. So in just a few short years under the Turnbull government, this middle income tax bracket will be increasing from $80,000 up to $120,000, helping millions of Australians avoid going into a higher tax bracket. In fact, 1.8 million will be prevented from facing the 37% tax rate in 22-23, keeping them in that lower 32.5% tax bracket. The third and final phase of the government's income tax plan is to ensure that our tax system becomes much more simple and much flatter, because we all know that a simple and more flat tax system is a more efficient tax system, and it's a tax system which better rewards people's efforts. From 1 July 2024, the government will increase the top threshold of the 32.5% tax bracket from $120,000 to $200,000. Effectively, what that does is abolishes the 37% tax bracket completely. That means the second highest tax bracket, which a number of Australians pay now and will pay in the future, will be abolished entirely. A result of this plan means that 94% of taxpayers are projected to face a tax rate of just 32.5% or even less by 24-25. I think one of the great features of this plan is the flat nature of the tax system that will be introduced. People earning from $41,000 onwards up to $200,000 will face no disincentives for working longer hours, from going for a higher paid job, because they will remain in the same tax bracket. No matter how much extra they earn, they'll still pay up to $200,000. They'll still pay 32.5% on their tax. Now, of course, if we don't make these changes, in fact, it will only be 63% of taxpayers who will have that protection. What the Coalition wants to do is allow people to keep more of their own money, because, unlike the Labor Party and the Greens, we actually believe in reward for effort. Now, I think this is a good tax plan. I think it's an ambitious tax plan. I think it delivers welcome tax relief for millions of working Australians. But, to be truthful, it is not the most ambitious tax plan that I've read about recently. In fact, I have here in front of me a much more ambitious tax plan that proposes much more significant cuts to not just the thresholds of tax, but the rate of tax. And I admit it is from 2005, in fact August 2005, and I'm reading from an article in the Sunday Age by Jason Katsoukas and Josh Gordon, since retired from the Fairfax Bureau, and it's entitled "Union Chief Joins Call for Big Tax Cuts. Top rate should be 30 cents, says Shorten." And I go on. One of Australia's most influential union leaders has called for the top income tax rate to be slashed to 30 cents in the dollar as the push for widespread tax reform gathers pace. Australian Workers' Union National Secretary Bill Shorten, who is widely tipped to enter Parliament at the next election, said all rates needed to be simplified as part of a radical overhaul of the tax system. Well, Mr Katsoukas and Mr Gordon were spot on. They could see the future. Mr Shorten did indeed enter the Parliament, and I'll go on and read, he urged Labor to embrace genuine reform to try to wrong-foot the Howard government. Mr Shorten's call came as Labor's finance spokesperson Lindsay Tanner has also backed calls to slash the top marginal tax rate, now 47 cents in the dollar. Mr Shorten said tax reform was the best way to boost sagging productivity levels. And I quote, "There is no question that we have to offer fair dinkum tax reform," Mr Shorten told The Age. "All this tinkering about offering people $6 a week tax cuts is just putting lipstick on the tax system." Mr Shorten has proposed a radical simplification of tax scales, with the top rate of 30 cents in the dollar, a medium rate of 20 cents in the dollar and a lower rate of 10 cents in the dollar. He said the top rate would cut in above $100,000, with income between $50,000 and $100,000 to be taxed at 20 cents in the dollar and income below $50,000 to be taxed at 10 cents, all to be funded by cutting out all the business tax frauds and the business welfare. Well, I have to say, I have to confess, It doesn't sound like too bad a plan to me. In fact, it's in many ways much more ambitious than the plan that the government's proposed. It would involve massive tax cuts for many Australians, including those on higher incomes. It compares to the government's tax plan in the same way as, I guess, the Liberal Democrats' tax plan compares to our current tax plan. It's a very radical tax plan proposing very significant tax cuts. And I aspire to one day ensure that Bill Shorten's vision for Australia's personal income tax system is achieved. Sadly, we know now it won't be achieved under Bill Shorten because Bill Shorten has said that the government's much more modest proposals to reduce taxes in fact go far too far and are unfair. Well, if the government's proposals are unfair, I wonder what 2018 Bill Shorten thinks of 2005 Bill Shorten. I wonder what he thinks of the ambitious young Australian Workers' Union union leader aspiring to enter the parliament and his ambitious plan for cutting taxes. This is a little bit of a pattern, colleagues. This is not the first time that Bill Shorten has proposed quite pro-market, pro-reform, low-tax policies. In fact, as we all know and as we've all heard in this chamber umpteen times, he's proposed quite significant cuts to the company tax system as well. But we know that Bill Shorten's position has changed, and I wonder why that is. I wonder why now, as opposition leader, that he's walking away from principles that he's held throughout his career. He's walking away from his commitment to lower personal income taxes. He's walking away from his commitment to lower company taxes. It might just be that Mr Shorten is an ambitious person who wants to be Prime Minister and is willing to say or do anything in order to achieve that, and is willing to walk away from principles he himself has espoused well within living memory. Now, some of the criticism of the government's tax plan has been that the benefits in the tax reduction will in some way be distributed unfairly. Well, even the Grattan Institute today has acknowledged that the progressivity of the income tax system in Australia will be altered in no significant way by our tax plan, and the Grattan Institute is not exactly a renowned friend of coalition governments. It was, of course, famously founded by the Rudd and Brumby governments with an injection of $15 million each of taxpayers' money, and sits upon a $30 million plus taxpayer-funded endowment courtesy of the Rudd government and the Brumby government. Not renowned for being a close ally or friend of coalition governments or free markets, but nonetheless have acknowledged that there'd be no significant change to the progressive nature of the Australian tax system as a result of the changes in this budget. I think it's worth actually putting some real facts and some real figures and some real numbers on the table here in this debate, because the truth is that as a result of this tax plan, Australians on an income of $30,000 a year will receive an 8.3% reduction in their tax bill over the course of the 7-year plan. That's a good and significant reduction. Australians on $50,000 will receive a little bit less. They'll receive a 6.3% reduction. Australians on $120,000 a year will receive a little bit less still. They'll receive a 2.9% reduction. Those on $160,000 will receive 2.4% reduction, and those on $200,000 will receive a reduction of 2.5%. So the greatest proportional reduction in tax bills goes to those on the lowest incomes, 8.3% for $30,000 compared to 2.5% for $200,000. Now, there are, of course, tax cuts for Australians with higher incomes in this budget, and I think that that is a very necessary and worthwhile change in this budget. The truth is, when you cut taxes, of course, in dollar terms, many of those benefits do accrue to people on higher incomes because they pay more taxes. The top 1% of income earners in Australia pay 17% of all income tax. The top 10% of income earners in Australia pay 45% of all income tax. To put that in stark dollar terms, someone on $200,000, who, as we heard earlier, was getting a 2.5% reduction in their tax bill, pays $67,000 in tax. Someone on $100,000 pays $26,000 in tax. Someone earning $50,000 pays $8,000 in tax, and someone earning $30,000 pays only $2,700 tax. Our tax system is highly progressive. People on higher incomes pay a much greater amount of tax, both in real dollar terms and as a proportion of their income. And under this tax cut plan, although they will get tax reductions proportional to the tax they pay, it will be very modest compared to the very significant reductions at the lower end of the scale. I realise that in my enthusiasm to talking about Bill Shorten's exciting, ambitious 2005 personal income tax reform plan. I've run out of my time to talk about some of the other great features of the budget. I was going to talk about how excited I was about bringing forward the return to surplus by a year. I was going to talk about how excited I was about the increase in the size of the surplus, about the wonderful infrastructure package my home state of Victoria is the recipient of. But sadly, there is so much good news in this budget that I've run out of time, even in 20 minutes, to address it all. So I'm sure there will be another opportunity to return to the Senate to share more good news with my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Senator